You drowned when you were 5. That's what my cousin Daphne would say, flicking water droplets into my face, making me recoil to avoid getting hit in the eye. Every time the family met up for Christmas, Daphne would always tell me this, making me go searching for Mom and Dad in tears, asking if it was true. They would exchange glances before telling me, "No, Daphne is just teasing you." My uncle, Daphne's dad, would then scold her for telling me lies, but sometimes I wonder if she spoke the truth. It would explain why I didn't like swimming, baths, and going to the ocean. Instead, I took showers, didn't go swimming, and avoided the ocean at all costs. I also had no recollection of my early years of life, which is normal, I suppose. But it always bothered me how much I don't remember. Usually, you have a memory or two that would come to you randomly, or something that makes you wonder, was that a real memory, or was it a dream? My only memory of my early life was when I was 6, playing with several other children. We were playing tag. I'm married now, with a wife, but sometimes when I'm trying to fall asleep, I try my hardest to reach into my mind and pull something forth. What was preventing me from remembering my early days? I would ask my wife, frustrated. Courtney, my wife, would be holding our baby and smiled apologetically to me and would say, "Maybe you're just one of those people who don't have a good memory." "I wish I could remember things and figure out if I really drowned," I said one day. "Be careful what you wish for," Courtney teased. "Your memory might come back and turns out you're actually a demon." I should have been careful what I wished for. Dad passed away from heart failure a few years ago, and a week ago Mom also died. My adoptive siblings, Troy and Anna, greeted me at the door of Mom's house. Troy, the rather emotional fellow of the three of us, welcomed me home with a bone-crushing hug. Anna smiled sadly. "Good to see you, Hector." "So, should we begin?" I asked after depositing my suitcase in my old bedroom. Anna, who had been in charge of our parents' legal stuff, had already taken care of everything. We got decent inheritance, a lot of money, and a few precious items, but we now had to comb through the house, deciding what to keep and what to sell. We would start on the first floor, starting in the living room, before slowly making our way throughout the rest of the house. Anna and I had both agreed to let Troy take the house, even though he protested. Eventually, we made our way to the attic, which was very big. We went through boxes, each one of us finding a box with our names written on it. We lugged the boxes to our rooms. I opened mine eagerly. Inside was a photo album, toys, and clothing from when I was a baby. And underneath everything was an old diary. Opening it to the first page, I noticed Mom's name written on it. At first, I was hesitant in reading it. This had been Mom's diary, but curiosity ate away at me. The first entry was the day after Mom married Dad. A year later, I was born. That's when it dawned on me. My heart began beating faster. This diary was probably the key in learning what happened to me, and if Daphne had been telling the truth after all. I flipped through the diary, pausing to read the entries that had my name in it. Everything seemed normal. Every entry about what I was doing, what I ate, so on and so forth. Then I found the entries around the time I was 5. There in an entry of August, did everything become clear to me. The worst thing happened. I write this with a shaking hand. Richard and I took Hector to the pond at Mother's house. Hector knew how to swim, but I turned my back on him to pull out his floaties. When I turned back again, I realized that Hector was gone. That's when I noticed the bubbles in the pond, and with a scream I ran to the pond's edge. I saw Hector sinking slowly into the depths. Without thinking, I threw myself into the water. I managed to reach Hector and grabbed him by the stomach. The pond was so deep, deeper than any pond I knew. That's when I noticed the pale hands clinging to Hector. Praying, I ripped Hector out of the grip of the hands and swam to the surface. While Father tried to resuscitate Hector, I tried explaining what I saw. Mother. Several sentences were covered in black ink, hiding what was once written on the paper. And Richard didn't believe me. Other entries went on at length with what she saw, and how I had no memory of what happened. She was adamant on what she saw, and was so sure it really happened. But that's not the most alarming thing. Whenever Mom drew a bath for me, and I was in the bathroom with her, She could see long, slender, pale hands visible in the water. That's when she pulled the plug from the bathtub and then started to get me to shower. That's when the diary stopped. Shocked, I closed the diary. Was that true? Or did Mom imagine the whole thing? I went downstairs but merely told Anna and Troy about the photo album, toys and clothing, but nothing about the diary and what had happened to me. The question on whether I drowned or not was answered, but more questions rose. I needed to answer those questions, and I wanted them now. I knew where Grandmother's old house was, and telling Anna and Troy where I was going, I was on my way. When I knocked on the door, I was surprised when Daphne answered the door. "Oh," she said, frowning. "It's you." "It's me," I answered quietly. Even though I had grown taller than her, she still intimidated me. The rather unpleasant memories of her came flooding back. "Why are you here?" "I live here now," she said, opening the door and inviting me in. As she poured me tea, she spoke. "I know why you're here." "Why I'm here?" "Why am I here?" I asked rather rudely. "You want to know the truth," Daphne said. "I'm not here to stop you, but I must warn you to be careful. I told Granny. I told her you'd be back here." She laughed at me, she did. "Don't be stupid, he doesn't know." She smirked. But I proved her wrong. I knew, yes, I did. She sat down. "Granny never liked your mom. Not like hated her, but disliked how your mom put herself in danger, always playing in that pond in the back. According to Granny, your mom doesn't remember a thing. Apparently your mom, as a little girl, went to the pond and said out loud, 'When I'm married, I want a boy.'" Daphne waggled a finger at me. "I'm just repeating what Granny told me, and what Granny told me was from what your mom said to her. Anyways, according to her, a woman emerged from the pond. A beautiful woman with pale, smooth skin, pale eyes, and long blonde hair that was so pale it looked translucent. She told your mom, 'You shall have a boy, babe. But if he comes here, I shall take him back with me.' Granny was not happy when your mom said all that." "Did Grandma know about the woman?" I asked, curiosity getting to me. Daphne clicked her tongue. "The lady of the pond lived many years ago, before Great Granny. She was accused of witchcraft and was drowned in that pond. Granny suspects she might have been a child of fairies, but who knows? Granny was beyond livid when you drowned." "But I lived," I said with a frown. "I didn't drown." "Did you drown, or did you live?" Daphne asked, frowning as she picked up her cup of tea. "That is the question. Did you drown and lived, or did you drown and die? The only one who knows is the lady of the pond, and she hasn't said a peep since. Trust me, I went to the pond many times and spoke to the water." "You're a good storyteller," I said, knowing that flattery was the best way to get Daphne to confess she was lying. "It was not me who told the story," Daphne said, scowling deeply. "I'm just retelling the story." Now it was my turn to scowl. When did she start speaking like this? The change in character irked me. I was used to her being so different. I wouldn't say she matured, but rather became more aware, in a sense. Aware of things beyond my understanding. She eventually shooed me out of the house, but not before directing me to the pond on the edge of the property. "Lady of the pond might come out if you approach. Just don't go into the water or touch her. She'll probably drown you. Keep a good distance, like out of reach." I made my way to the pond, glancing back at the house to see Daphne hovering on the back porch, staring. When I reached the pond, I stood a few feet away from the edge, feeling rather stupid. For all I knew, this was a prank from Mom with Daphne in on it, but my doubt gave way to shock when I realized, with a jolt, I was staring at a woman's face. She was like how Daphne described her, only I noticed she was naked. At least her torso was. I couldn't see her legs as they seemed invisible. "You're back," the woman spoke softly, her voice as clear as water. "I missed you. I missed you so much." Sadness pooled into her pale eyes, almost a white-yellow color. "You were in my arms when that woman ripped you out. Why did she take you back when she didn't want you?" "But she did want me," I blurted out, leaping to Mom's defense. Confusion was on her face. "But if she wanted you, why did she bring you back and let you go into the water?" She blinked, looking like a puppy that had been kicked. I noticed her hands twitch nervously. Her hands were constantly moving underwater, a bit hypnotic to watch. I watched as you ran into the water. That's when I reached out to hug you and let you sink. You looked so happy. That's when I noticed she jumped into the water and ripped you out of my arms. But I ran into the water, I argued. The lady sank a bit, so the water was covering her mouth and nose. Her big eyes were displeased at the contradiction. A silence grew between us. The lady spoke again. I told her a long time ago, if you no longer want him, bring him back here. I frowned. She did want me. She was a child when you spoke to Mom. Of course she wouldn't remember meeting you. Frustrated, I rubbed my forehead. It seemed like she mistook Mom's actions, which caused me to almost drown. I edged a bit closer to the pond's edge. Who are you? I asked. Why are you here? I once lived on the edge of town just yonder, the lady said. I was the healer of the town in a sense. I was accused of witchcraft, and they drowned me here. I've always been here, watching through the surface as the years passed. She peered at me, floating closer to me. Maybe I was a witch, since I granted you to your mother. Interested, I crouched down, wanting to hear more. The curiosity was killing, but it was my eagerness to learn more that nearly killed me. Quick as a snake, the lady grabbed my ankle, and with a sharp jerk dragged me under the water. I barely had time to take a breath of air before my whole body was submerged in the cold water. Thrashing about in the water, I tried kicking at the lady, but even with my eyes open, I couldn't see anything. Everything was dark and murky, reminding me eerily of water where you can't see predators lurking about. That's when I looked down. The lady's face became visible, her skin almost glowing. Her long hair pillowed out of the water, and I could see her whole body, including her legs, which to my horror, I realized they were sewn together. That's how they drowned her, a faint voice said in my mind as I struggled. They stitched her legs together. My lungs were burning for air, and I was beginning to accept that I was going to die. But it seemed like Daphne had other plans. An arm looped under my armpit, and into my view came Daphne's hand, which contacted the lady's face, harshly slammed her nails into the lady's eyes, and through the water, I could hear a scream of agony. The hand released my ankle, freeing me. With a jerk, Daphne began swimming up with me, but I think I must have blacked out, because the next thing I know, Daphne was doing CPR. When she saw I was alive, she called an ambulance for me and got me to the town's hospital. She explained to the doctor I must have slipped into the pond and got knocked out. When the doctor looked at me questioningly, I grinned sheepishly and said, "Yeah, that's what happened." I couldn't tell the truth. We would be seen as crazy. The doctor wanted to keep me at the hospital overnight, and I had no issues with that. After calling Courtney and getting yelled at, I sat in the hospital bed, awkwardly staring at Daphne, who sat back in her chair frowning at me. "What's your issue?" I finally asked, unable to handle the awkwardness. "I told you not to go near the water or touch her," Daphne said, her voice low. "And yet what do? Get within reaching distance. You're lucky I was watching, else you'd be dead." She clicked her tongue at me, disapproval in her eyes. In a turn of irony, after the second drowning, I actually felt comfortable taking a bath, and even went swimming in pools. However, I think I'll still avoid large bodies of water. I've been Santa at the mall in my city for the past 5 years. I truly love my job. It does my soul so good to see a child's face light up when they see the big man. It's not always been easy. Sometimes you need a bathroom break, but don't want to upset a child that's been in line for a while by making them wait longer. Sometimes you get pee on you. Sometimes kids cry too. I've been asked sad questions that are hard to answer. I've been asked by a child to help their mom find a job. I've been asked for a military child wanting their daddy to come home. I always tell them that I make toys mainly, but I will try my very best. It makes me want to cry to see a child not want anything more than their parent. I've been hit on by adults too, which gets kind of weird. Some beautiful women have been very flirty, but I always tell them Miss Claus wouldn't be happy if I didn't come home to her at the end of the day. I really don't do this for the money, which isn't half bad. In fact, I give it away to the Salvation Army. That and paying some helpers. Being Santa really opens your heart for those less fortunate. I see that this page on here is where people talk about the scary things that they've witnessed. I figured me wanting to talk about what happened a few hours ago will maybe make me feel better. Maybe someone can even give me some advice. I shown up to work without my uniform, as I had it in the little house behind my throne. There I change. I talked to Emily, one of the helpers. "Emily, what's going on?" "Nothing much. You ready to make some kids happy?" She was such a sweet girl. Her heart was as kind as her smile. This is the second year of her being a helper. She's just 18 and was saving some of this money for college. "Of course. I'll go get changed." The day went by rather quickly. Only another hour until we closed up for the evening. I had a bunch of letters written for me that I kept, and my face was starting to slightly hurt from the amount of pictures we sold. I still remember what kids asked for. Dwight asked for a Harry Potter Lego set. Jenny asked for a real fur pet. Kevin wanted a train set. And old little James asked to become the greatest football player and play for the Patriots. Gosh, I hate the Patriots. We had a few entitled kids too. The ones who believe they are owed whatever they ask for. I do my best to ignore them. Jimmy was different. Most kids have a parent stand in line with them, but this little guy didn't. He was probably 8 or 9. He had pasty white skin and red hair. He wore a red and white striped shirt, hiding behind some overalls. "Santa? Ho, 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 come up on Santa's lap." Pam, another helper, assisted helping him up on my lap. "This is Jimmy," she said cheerfully. "What would you like for Christmas, Jimmy?" He remained silent. I guess I thought he was nervous. "I understand why you're nervous, Jimmy." "You do?" he said faintly. "Of course I do. It's not every day the big man comes through." "It's not that." His voice gotten slightly louder. He started to speak up but wouldn't. I was concerned he was going to say that his parents abused him or something else. "Well, a monster's been under my bed all my life. Sometimes she comes and talks to me. Sometimes she follows me. She said the only way that she'd leave is if she found someone else to go to. I figured you could get rid of her." He stared in the distance as if he was distracted by something. I hate that kids are scared of make-believe monsters. I wanted him to be comforted. No kid should be scared. "Jimmy, I will make sure that monster won't bother you anymore, but you gotta believe that with all your heart, that she's gone." He had tears in his eyes as he glanced the same direction and started hugging me. "Santa, you're the best." "Ho, ho, ho, let me grab you a candy cane." I felt him hop off my lap and he took off running. It made my day that I helped a boy conquer fear. The ride home was tiring. I swear I felt like someone was staring at me. Most of you felt that feeling before, I'm sure. I was getting ready for bed. I poured myself a glass of bourbon and eggnog and was getting ready to watch the game. Then I heard a voice. Raspy, evil, brutal. "Santa, you don't know what you've done." I turned my head and seen something crawling under my bed. I didn't get a good look though. I don't own a gun, and I'm not brave enough to go searching, so I called the cops. They didn't see anything. I decided to go sleep at a friend's house. He didn't hear anything, but I swear I heard the voice. "Bet Jimmy is sleeping good now. Too bad you won't. I'll update when I can. I need advice, please. I don't think I'm going crazy. I think Jimmy passed something on to me." I live in Hudson, Oregon, and sometimes when they cut down a tree in my town, they find a body inside. I don't mean that they find bodies inside the hollows. I mean that the bodies are found completely encased within the wood of solid, whole trees. According to my grandpa, there were stories of bodies in trees going around Hudson since before he could remember. He thinks they started in the 1800s as old pioneer and settler stories. But they were just that, stories. No, the first confirmed instance didn't occur until the 70s. According to my dad, when he was about 11, he'd heard rumors that the Benson family had cut down a tree in their backyard, were chopping it up for firewood, and boom, bones and clothes in the middle of the logs. Donnie Fillmore told me it was like the wood had grown around the corpse, he remembers. Dad got unnerved. Dad told Grandpa, and Grandpa, a science enthusiast who didn't even raise his children to believe in Santa Claus, laughed and said those stories had been around forever. My dad was pretty shook up though, so Grandpa said that if it would calm him down, he'd take him to the Bensons himself to prove that it was just the newest iteration of an old story. They went to the Bensons. It wasn't just a story. Nobody knew who it was the Bensons found in the tree. Grandpa says some wacko in town even tried to persuade people the body had grown inside the tree. But everyone pointed out real soon that didn't explain the clothes. The reporters came to Hudson, of course. Dad says he even remembers a news truck. There are some old newspaper articles about it from archives I was able to find online, but the news never really made it national. Grandpa says it got drowned out by Watergate. They buried the remains in an unmarked plot in the local cemetery, and for years people joked that if someone was running late to a meeting, they'd been caught by a tree. The second body they found is much better documented. In fact, you may have heard about it yourself. In 1987, a landscaping company hired by Westford Construction was clearing out some forest land for homes. The landscaping company, whose name I haven't been able to find, it may have been off the books illegal immigrant labor, decided to mitigate costs of labor by selling felled trees to Gernstein Lumber, a local timber processing plant. Guess what they found in one of the trees? Body found within tree. Sandra Tyson, Portland Times, defunct, March 29, 1987. Hudson, Oregon. A lumber processing plant was shocked on Monday to discover the remains of a missing woman encased within the wood of one of the trees it was processing. Hector Torres, a supervisor at the Gernstein lumber processing plant, informed authorities that workers had found clothes and human bones within some timber that the plant was in the process of preparing for sale. Local authorities have identified the body as Helen Fields, a Hudson woman who was reported missing in 1974. Robert and Cassandra Fields, the parents of the missing woman, say that while they are at peace now that their daughter has been found, they want to know what happened to her and how her body came to be encased within a tree. Fields' remains will be laid to rest with a memorial service at the Hudson City Cemetery on Saturday. You can still find some other articles about the incident online from newspaper archives, though it's most frequently talked about in publications about mysteries and urban legends. Of course, the article doesn't tell you that they'd already cut up the tree when they found the body. I've called Mr. Torres myself, who told me they didn't notice anything strange until the machinery started making funny noises during the cutting, and that they had to hand over 4 different slabs of wood to the police. Also, the article seems to imply that either the body was intact enough to identify, it wasn't, or that they did some sort of DNA testing. I don't think they did. From what a retired cop told me, they were only able to ID the body because they found a Sears name tag encased in the wood with the name Helen on it, though they had to sand it down to make the name visible, and Helen Fields had been working for the local Sears at the time of her disappearance. Also, again from what I can tell, the news never really reached a national scale. Dad says it got drowned out by the Iran-Contra scandal. From what I've been able to find, there weren't any incidents after 1987, at least none that were reported. During the 80s, Hudson had been touted as the next Portland. The city was planning to expand as much as it could, cutting into the forest land to build homes and stores. But while the rest of America's economy boomed, for some reason Hudson's failed, and the plans for expansion were scrapped. In fact, I haven't been able to find evidence that any more forest land in Hudson has been cleared since 1987. As you could have probably guessed, I've done my research about this Hudson phenomenon. I'd heard the stories a time or two growing up. They weren't any sort of hushed town secret, nor were they any sort of oft-told. Important part of the town's heritage, more than anything. They were just things that had happened, and everyone in town, busy with their own lives, had simply moved on. They were the kinds of stories that you forget for years at a time, and when you were at a party or a hangout and one of your friends mentioned them, you'd feel a light turn in your head and you'd remember them. And you might even have a spooky conversation for half an hour or so before the topic changed again, and you'd talk about something else. Heck, the stories might even linger in your mind for a couple of days, but work and relationships and bills and new gossip push them to the back of your mind for another several years, until someone else at another party mentions them again. So let me tell you when the stories become more than just stories to me. Last year, I was at my friend Eddie's apartment. His full name was Edgar, a secret few knew, and fewer could tell without him knocking their teeth out. It had been a rough day for Eddie. His girlfriend of 4 years had packed up her things in the apartment and left without so much as a note, even changing her cell number. As I'd later find out on Facebook, she'd moved back in with her parents. Eddie had had a few beers, and I was trying to talk him through things. He wasn't listening too much. He just sort of sat there with his eyes unfocused, and, in spite of the beers, was more fidgety than ever. I remember Judge Judy was on the TV in the background. We'd been there for about half an hour when suddenly Eddie got up. "Just a sec," he said, heading to his bedroom and emerging about a minute later with an axe. "Dude," I said cautiously. "You can keep talking," he said, and resolutely, he marched straight out the front door. I followed him. I asked him what he was doing, but he didn't answer. He didn't even act like I was there. It was getting dark. We walked out of the neighborhood and into the nearby grove of trees. It's about 2 miles wide. I had my phone in my pocket ready to call somebody, even the police, in case my friend was about to do something he'd regret. Finally, when we were far enough into the grove that we couldn't hear the rush of cars from the freeway, Eddie stopped at a tree. He looked at it, sizing it up for a moment, and quicker than I thought him capable, he swung the axe into the tree with a resounding thwack. "Dude," I said again. "I'm listening," he said. I hadn't said anything in 10 minutes. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Clearing my mind," he said. After a moment he stopped, looked around and pointed a bit further into the grove, and there, about 50 yards out, I saw a felled tree lying on the ground. This was evidently not the first tree that Eddie had taken his anger out on. He'd always been a wall puncher in high school, and I guessed his coping mechanisms had evolved into more aggressive vandalism that, if you were careful, you didn't have to pay for damaging. I should have told him to stop, but he was whacking away at the tree like it had killed his sister. His teeth were gritted. I don't think he was drunk enough to hurt anyone, but he might have been tipsy enough to hurt himself. He thwacked and thwacked again, a few chips flying from the tree here and there. Then he let out a guttural yell as he dealt the tree a particularly vicious blow. The axe got stuck in the tree with a sickening thud, and with some effort, Eddie pulled it out again. "Stop!" I yelled, and surprisingly, Eddie actually stopped. "What?" he said impatiently. "Look," I said, pointing at the blade of the axe. The blade was spattered with dark, red liquid. I hadn't seen a whole lot of blood in greater quantities than when you cut yourself shaving. For a second, my brain didn't even register that the liquid might have been blood. We looked at the tree, and from the most recent blow, dark ichor was now oozing down the bark. The stories all came rushing back to the forefront of my mind. We both looked at each other. For a moment, we didn't say anything. Eddie looked absolutely stunned. Then Eddie swung the axe into the tree again, but this time, it was not a passionate blow. It was calculated, or at least as calculated as a semi-inebriated Eddie could manage. I remember his face, no longer contorted in anger. It was the face of morbid curiosity. Eddie swung again, but swore after announcing that he'd missed the mark. He tried again and swore again, and I, seized myself by the same morbid curiosity, convinced Eddie to let me try. I chipped away lightly at the wood around the bleeding cut. The axe proved too clumsy an instrument for the job, so Eddie went back to his apartment and fetched a hatchet and a pocket knife, and I got to work. I carved and pulled away wood, all the time wondering if I was really going to find a body. and soon after peeling away a chunk of wood, I saw it. A strip of blood-soaked denim. We had reached a leg. We kept at it. We should have called the cops right then, but we didn't. The thought didn't even cross my mind, and I doubt it would have ever crossed Eddie's. Over the course of an hour, we carved out the left side of the body, whittling and pulling away strips of wood as we made our way up the leg, hip, and all the way up to the abdomen, where we hit the blue, shredded fabric of a dress shirt. I was expecting the body to be far more decomposed, but no. As long as I was careful, I didn't pierce any of the pale, bloated flesh through the jeans, which were stained with blood in places Eddie definitely hadn't hit with the axe, kept getting caught in the blade. Though I was fine working away the wood, I couldn't bring myself to touch the body itself anywhere. The smell was horrible. I can't even begin to describe it, as I'd never smelled anything like it before, and have not smelled anything like it again. As I worked, Eddie remained silent, only handing me the tools I asked for. It got darker and darker, and Eddie had to use the light of his cell phone so I could see what I was doing. I didn't carve away too much, so that most of the body remained upright within the tree. Though when I had started out, I was dumb enough to carve the leg out so much that it dangled, and where it more decomposed, might have threatened to fall out while leaving the rest of the body in the tree. We carved our way up the body until the form of the chest, shoulders, and neck were all visible. Then we got to the face. I worked the wood away, and a man's face was slowly revealed. Though several strips of skin were pulled off with the wood, the eyes were closed, the nose looked like it had been crushed, and as I worked my way downward, I realized that the mouth was open. I had to use my pocket knife to pry the wood out of the body's open mouth. It took several minutes and lots of wiggling, but I finally managed to yank it out, though several of his teeth came with it. For the first time, I stood back to look at my grim handiwork. There in front of me was the body of a fellow human being, his face frozen eternally in a scream. I don't know whether the adrenaline had worn off, or if I just hadn't taken the time to really think, but the actual horror of this situation finally hit me. My knees felt weak, and I had to lean against the tree. Eddie just stood there, silent. As I looked over the body, I noticed that we hadn't uncovered an arm, and as I scanned the shape of the shoulder, I realized that the arm must still be in the tree, stretching upward to where we hadn't carved yet. Whoever this man was, he had died with his arm reaching upward. That's when we called the cops. They showed up after about 20 minutes and roped off the area, though who would be coming into the middle of the forest was beyond me. We told them our story, and I know they smelled the booze on Eddie's breath, so I did most of the talking. As they took photographs of the tree and started prying out the rest of the body, one of the younger cops went on a power trip, saying we should have called him immediately after finding the body, and shouldn't have interfered so much with it. In fact, he might even charge us with vandalism of public property. We were let off the hook, however, after one of the older cops subtly told him to relax. They made some half-hearted attempts to tell us to go home, but we stuck around long enough to watch them finish pulling the rest of the remains out of the tree. They had to do it in pieces. I kept calling the cops over the next few days, asking for updates. During that time, I researched bodies in trees online, talked to my family, and made phone calls around town, which is how I found all the information I've already shared. When I called the cops about a week later, they finally told me that they had ID'd the body as Jim Peters, a 43-year-old real estate agent who had gone missing a month before. Just 1 month? I pointed out that even if the tree could have grown around the corpse, it would have taken years for it to grow around the body as much as it had. The cops didn't have anything to say about that. The mystery didn't end there, though. Jim Peters was not from Hudson. He'd gone missing from Phoenix, Arizona, but it was definitely Jim Peters. They did DNA testing and everything. Nobody had any answers as to how a guy from Arizona had ended up dead inside a tree in Hudson, Oregon. A few days later, Eddie knocked on my door. He looked a little rough around the edges, dirty jeans and flannel shirt, bags under his eyes, unshaven, but he was sober. He smelled like a campfire. "Where have you been?" I asked. "Around," he said vaguely. We sat on the top step outside my apartment and talked while Eddie lit a cigarette. Crazy. We just happened to hit the tree with a person in it, I eventually said. Eddie scoffed. Wasn't luck, he said, taking a deep drag. So what? I said. It was fate? No, he said. It was just pretty much guaranteed to happen. What do you mean? I mean that of course we were going to knock one down with a body in it, he said. Don't you get it? No, I had to admit. We knocked down a tree with a body in it, he said, because they all have bodies inside them. I was stunned. How do you know? Well, maybe not all of them, he allowed, but lots of them. Eddie, I said slowly, how do you know that? For a long time he didn't say anything, just smoked. I knew better than to prod, so I let him sit in silence until he was ready to talk. Eventually, I checked my phone. He'd been silent for 8 minutes straight. He even put out his cigarette on the cement and lit another one. I gotta go, he finally said, getting up. I almost tried to stop him, but he was Eddie. That would have been pointless. About 2 weeks later, Eddie's parents called me. He hadn't answered his phone in 6 days. Last time we talked with him, they said, he said he was on his way to see you. I'll try to get a hold of him, I said, but it's probably just Eddie being Eddie. I tried calling Eddie. He didn't answer. I drove down to his apartment and knocked on the door. Nobody answered. So I grabbed the key I knew he kept under the mat, unlocked the door, and walked in. All of his stuff was there, but Eddie was nowhere to be seen. I called the cops and reported him missing before calling his parents. After I was finished, I drove back to my apartment, parked my car, and for the first time in years, I cried. I sat there and cried. After about half an hour, I finally wiped my eyes and got out of the car. I locked the doors, got out, made my way onto the sidewalk, began crossing the apartment courtyard, and almost fell down. There in the middle of the courtyard's grass, and where there definitely hadn't been one before, was a fully grown elm tree. I'm currently in the process of moving to Indiana. I'm leaving Hudson in a few days, and twice in the middle of the night, I've gone down to the elm tree, carrying my own axe. But I just don't have it in me to confirm for myself that Eddie is in there.
Thank you for making it this far. I'd like to encourage you to subscribe if you like my content. If you'd like to follow me and want to be involved in what I'm doing / talk to me, follow me on Twitter or Instagram. If you'd like an offline experience, check out the podcast, The Midnight Podcast. And if you're at all inclined, I've got some merch out there to be purchased if you'd like to support the channel. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next video.